Hello and welcome to the third installment of the Navel Gaze podcast, where we talk about autosexuality. Most prominently and most controversially, we've been talking about autogynephilia and autoandrophilia. Today's conversation is going to focus on the different types of criticism that we've received from people who have listened to our theory and are skeptical about the existence of autoandrophilia in particular. The pushback that we've encountered, both to our conversations personally and just to the concept of autoandrophilia more broadly, is necessary to this conversation. We are eager to talk to people who are skeptical of our theory. Some of the skepticism that we've encountered is sort of rooted in the sexology. So a common refrain is that autoandrophilia, while these types of symptoms may exist in a certain population of females, this is not actually an analog to autogynephilia because females don't have paraphilias. Other types of criticism that we've received has to do more with sort of our motivated reasoning and how we might be sort of projecting our pet theory onto cases where it's really not appropriate and really doesn't fit. And we think this is important to address, not just because it potentially sharpens our argument, but because at the end of the day, we would like to be wrong about autoandrophilia. For social reasons, for personal reasons, our lives would be simpler if it were not true that females can have this long-standing desire to embody the opposite sex, to embody maleness anatomically and socially. And so our conversation today is going to try to address some of these criticisms and then also discuss each of our sort of analysis of our reasoning and of our motivation to go down this road.
Yeah. It's even since well before you and I started working on this together, I was getting that criticism. Probably about a years more ago that I started talking about autoandrophilia and publicly identifying myself as being autoandrophilic. And the one thing that I keep coming back to that I really want to drive home is I don't want to be autoandrophilic. I don't want that to be the explanation for my dysphoria. It's very not only is it kind of stigmatizing to have a paraphilia, but my experience of it certainly doesn't feel paraphilic or fetishistic or anything like that. That's like my foundational why I want to be wrong about this. Another reason is that I had come to kind of see myself as being genuinely and exclusively same-sex attracted, and having the explanation be autoandrophilia really knocks that self-understanding on its face, because it's basically saying that my attraction to women is meta attraction. So, and as far as the sexologists are concerned, it's not genuine attraction. It's a byproduct of an identity that I have concocted, and that doesn't feel good. Like that's not a way I want to understand, myself, my attraction, and my relationship with my partner, obviously. That's not, it doesn't feel true. And it also, I don't want it to be true. Right. I think that's the kind of the major reason why I want to be wrong about this. Is just that the evidence keeps telling me that I'm right. Let's not get there so fast. You maybe want to, because you have a similar kind of personal motivation for this to be false too.
Yeah, I definitely want to bounce off of that. Like you said, for your own sort of personal psyche and your self-concept, it would be nice to not think that you are paraphilic, right? And it would be nice not to have to question your attraction to females, or more specifically, your attraction to your fiance as you are recently engaged. And I think that's something that I can relate to a lot. And I think this is actually part of the block in people understanding autoandrophilia altogether is how that, not only what that says about the individual, but what that says about their relationships and about the people that they are attracted to and seek out partnerships with. So my wife, I mentioned in the first episode that she came out as trans to me basically several years ago. But to be more specific, she didn't come out as trans. Trans wasn't her end goal. She basically confessed this lifelong history of sex dysphoria, just severe discomfort in her body, and wanting to become a boy, really wanting to be a boy and then a man from some of the earliest memories in her childhood. And my wife started a social transition and later desisted as I kind of came out of this belief system of gender ideology. But my wife's dysphoria didn't go away. And so in trying to understand sort of what might cause dysphoria, what might explain dysphoria, I came across autoandrophilia. And for so many reasons, I thought it obviously couldn't apply to my wife. She, for one, is a lesbian. She's been lesbian identified her entire adult life. She's never had relationships, sexual or romantic, with men. She's, non-conforming. And although I didn't know her as a child, my understanding is that, this is not she didn't pick up a tomboy aesthetic in her 20s or 30s. This was something from an adolescent age that was part of her life. And then as I kind of learned more about not just autoandrophilia, but really learned more about allogynephilia and how that presents in some of these males, my wife and I started to explore in more detail what this gender sex dysphoria that she had confessed to me many years ago, what that actually looked like. And when we fleshed it out, we came to understand that she does have the sort of linchpin of the auto-heterosexual experience, which is part of her sexual arousal, motivation, and ability to connect during sex requires her to imagine herself as a male with the male body to go along with it. And so right now, my wife and I believe that AAP probably explains her sex dysphoria, her sexuality, sort of the trajectory that her life has taken. And that was sort of hard to swallow. I mean, I'm exceptionally open-minded. Like I said in the first episode, I call myself a lesbian, but I've been with men before. I'm not disgusted by maleness. I'm not a feminist. Like, I don't have any of these hangups. But what it first brought to mind is this insecurity of like, well, she's not really into me then, right? Because if she is autoandrophilic, then her base attraction is to males, and I'm not a male. So even though it felt like this sort of obviously explained my wife, especially the more detail that my wife and I went into about her experience of dysphoria, I didn't want it to. And even sort of early on in my conversations with Aaron, it was sort of like, oh, lucky me, I have one of the few like true, authentically homosexual butch lesbians as my partner. And so like Aaron, and maybe on the other end of it, as the wife to someone who's going through this, it can lead to insecurity, and it just doesn't feel good to believe that you might not actually be the apple of your lover's eye, basically. It's also embarrassing. It was embarrassing for my wife to share with me. She had never shared it with anyone else before. Even her sex dysphoria that she confessed to me, she told me she planned to take this to the grave. And obviously it would be embarrassing for me to try to explain to other people, because talking about your sexuality is embarrassing enough. Straight people with with no very vanilla people have a hard enough time talking about what gets them aroused. And so this wouldn't be we're not exactly singing this from the rooftops, but we're following this because we're trying to follow the evidence, and we're trying to look at the patterns of people who experience these different kinds of gender or sex dysphoria.
Yeah. It doesn't feel good to kind of to recognize this about yourself or in your partner, let alone to tell the world about it. But it just feels so important and necessary, because so many people are struggling with gender dysphoria, and they're being given an ideological explanation for it that doesn't actually explain it, and it doesn't it's not going to help young people turning up in these clinics, etc. If people don't know like this, what's at the psychological root of the dysphoric experience. And of course our hypothesis is that is auto heterosexuality, and that's why this is why we put our personal discomfort with this to the side. But we did also want to talk about like what could potentially be our motivated reasoning to believe that this is true, that to believe that we are correct. And one thing that I keep coming back to is just it is like it's been my obsessive personal interest for the last probably 8 or so months now, I want to say. That's been like kind of like front and center in my mind, maybe longer. And then there's the whole kind of like sunk cost that would go with it. Like, if I were wrong, I have spent this much time kind of pushing this. It's cost me some personal relationships with people who find this very, this topic disconcerting. And so there are, there's a lot of sunk cost involved in this for me. And so that could be, something that's pushing me to want it to be true. So that's something that I want to, of course, keep in mind, is like how much of this is just that personal investment in it being true, because I've already put so much time and kind of emotional effort into this. That's one for me anyway.
Yeah, and for me, well, I also just want to highlight, Aaron and I have discussed these things offline as well, because from the beginning of our conversations, it was important for us to assess how our own personal motivations might be influencing why we're sort of so excited about this theory and why we both feel so sure. So a few things that occur to me. Number one, I've been in this sort of gender critical space for several years now, and I've been listening to all the podcasts and, reading a bunch of the Substacks. And so there's this sort of parasocial relationship that forms. And so something that I stopped to consider is like, Aaron is someone whose work I've admired. Am I sort of socially or even parasocially like motivated to agree with him because that helps me, I don't know, get into the GC space more prominently, or because that, would validate just how good my thoughts are, right? And I'm smart just like the people up there. Now, if that were my motivation, I probably wouldn't have chosen Aaron, because I partnered with Aaron right as he has the lowest social capital in this community. But another thing that I had to consider for myself is I have a bit of a contrarian nature, and like most contrarians, I usually deny that when that accusation is lobbed at me, because I don't feel like I argue anything for the sake of it. I like to agree with Aaron, so obviously I'm not just disagreeable all the time, but especially sort of unwoking. and changing a ton of my politics, or a ton of my politics sort of evolving, I do consider the fact that, am I motivated to sort of go against the grain just naturally? Have I become so, paranoid is the wrong word, but so skeptical of conventional wisdom that I'm always looking to counter it? Again, my analysis is, I think that's unlikely, but these are the things that I've considered about what might be motivating me to be here to have this conversation with Aaron, other than, purely scientifically and dispassionately following the evidence.
Yeah, that's one I hadn't considered, and I am also susceptible to. It's like this is controversial, like this is yeah, and then and so that does, it's things like that do appeal to me, of course, as well. Yeah, that one hadn't occurred to me. And then
because contrarians don't like to see themselves as contrarians.
yeah. It's like, oh no, it's just about dispassionately following the evidence. But yeah, there is a part of me that kind of revels in having having opinions that others like, not
in debate even. I mean, I think
yes,
both of us, we really like
right,
to debate things.
Yes, it's having ideas that you can really kind of debate with other people. And so if I've just got all the right opinions and that match up with all my friends' opinions, it's like, oh, that makes for really boring conversations. But then the other was basically feeling like, what if I figured this out? Like there's also that motivation that it's like, I'm the first to, or not me personally, but like the two of us, is like, we have cracked something that others haven't cracked, like a kind of the whole explorer spirit, essentially, of being I mean, I think Phil kind of beat us both to it, but to expand it out further and to really kind of show how ubiquitous autoheterosexuality is when it comes to gender dysphoria, and how it can be found almost universally amongst the butch lesbian experience. Like that's quite revolutionary and groundbreaking, and that could be a motivating factor, as well as like to have been the one to make this discovery, if you will. There is some appeal there.
Oh yeah, I'm so
Certainly.
glad you brought that up. That is undeniably appealing.
Right.
To be at the forefront of, right, like if we truly have uncovered, we've turned the next stone, right, in understanding the mad rush for people to transition, right? If we've gotten a glimpse into not only what has been motivating people to transition in the past, but what's going on right now, especially because there is a real emphasis among the gender criticals about just how many of these young people transitioning today are lesbian, gay, and bisexual. And so, it's undeniably tempting to believe that we might be the ones to crack this code, right? I mean, I say that I personally think that the work that Phil's done is excellent towards the goal of destigmatizing and helping people understand themselves, but I also just think he has just an incredible knowledge. I mean, he studied almost everything that is available to look at, both in the history of the literature in sexology and psychology, but also the modern forums where people with gender dysphoria and trans identities get together to talk about their experiences. And so, my feeling is like Phil is going to end up in at least the sexology textbooks one day. So of course it's appealing to think, oh, maybe, will Aaron and I be a footnote in there? So that's a motivation that I think we would be remiss to omit here. That it's exciting to feel like that, like you discovered something.
Yep. Yep. Especially when we keep going back and like reading like that book that you're reading now, and that other ones from the 90s, where it's just like
Mm-hmm.
we keep seeing this evidence emerge that we didn't know existed, that
Yes.
completely corroborates what we're saying, and it gets more and more exciting the more and more kind of older case notes we encounter. And this is why we so want other people to disagree with us, to tell us what they believe that we are getting wrong, because not only does that help us to, let's say, fine tune our argument in our defense, but also, again, it'd be great to be wrong. Like it would be great for this to not be what explains mine and your wife's sexuality, psychology. Like that would be good.
Let me take it one step further.
Yeah.
Another reason why it would be great to be wrong is because then, one step back, part of what motivates Aaron and I to have this embarrassing and controversial conversation in public is that we think that we're sort of at a crossroads here, where there's a ton of people who aren't going to have their needs met and are going to potentially fall victim further to unnecessary medicalization, or to just sort of like depression and anxiety and things like this. And so if we are wrong, then there are already wonderful, well-established organizations fighting to protect these kids. If these young girls, especially, if none of them are AAP, and they are all sort of this rapid onset gender dysphoria, if they are all just sort of bright kids, socially motivated kids with comorbid mental health issues that they are reaching into the symptom pool and choosing transgender to get treatment for, then they're on their way to being helped. There are organizations out there who are trying to raise the alarm about this, who are trying to promote exploratory therapy, right, as opposed to the affirmation model. So we are really concerned about the individual people who are caught up in this. Aaron was one person caught up in this, and my wife was another. So we have personal investment in making sure that other people have a fair chance at making the healthiest decisions for themselves. And Aaron and I both believe that more often than not, the healthiest decision would not be to medicalize. So yeah, we would love for it to be true that none of the females going through this are in fact motivated by autoandrophilia, because then they will be helped by the existing model of this is ROGD or this is classic homosexuality, HSTS. But we fear that they won't be helped, that people are going to continue to fall through the cracks, that, what about the young ones who don't have comorbid mental health issues, who don't have history of sexual violence and trauma, but really in their minds, like, wish they had a man's penis to penetrate a partner with. They are not going to see themselves in the group of these young, mentally ill, socially contagious girls. And same thing for the people who have sort of woken up from this ideology, for some of the detransitioners. I think understanding that my wife's experience was shared by other butch lesbians was comforting. And it was helpful to that extent. Like, she's not alone. And my wife too. Like, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. I'm not the only person who's ever felt this. And in fact, there are people in our community, other gays, basically, other lesbians who are experiencing this too. But like I said earlier, but that didn't make it go away. And that's something really to chew on here. Because waking up from the lies of gender ideology is an extremely powerful force, both for the people who might have transitioned already or started a medical or social transition, and for the people like me who were previously the allies and the activists. It's kind of world shaking when you realize that all of that was a complete lie, and that people are actually being harmed by medical institutions that have bought into the idea that you can be born in the wrong body and that humans can change sex. And so it's such a powerful force, waking up from the fact that gender ideology is a lie, that it motivates a lot of people to detransition. And this is evident in friends and people that we know and other just sort of prominent detransitioners, that once they realize, I can't actually be a boy, I will never actually be a girl. This is not true. Human sex is actually dimorphic. Once they have that realization, it's a powerful enough motivator that they detransition, both socially and medically. And yet, this feeling of dysphoria in their sexed body doesn't go away. And so we worry that if we're not wrong, that these people, my wife included, are vulnerable to retransition potentially. If this is actually a lifelong thing that is sort of wired in your brain in the way that sexuality is, we're worried that they will be vulnerable to sort of falling victim again to the ideology, because at least the ideology allows them to manifest their cross sex ideation and goals, or that it just leaves them vulnerable to negative mental health outcomes. Because it's like, imagine you are one of these detransitioners and you realize that the whole thing was bunk, and that you were never born in the wrong body, and you don't actually have a boy's brain. And now you've worked out your trauma, and you've worked out with a therapist all of the things that might have contributed to you going down this road, but you're still feeling it. But years later, this urge comes back with a vengeance. We would like to be wrong, because that outcome would be very sad and potentially harmful all over again.
Yep. And we are also concerned that right now, what the kind of our allies in this, who are trying to reduce the number of people, certainly young people seeking transition, we're worried that right now that side of the gender war is offering an explanation for their experience that isn't accurate of their experience, and it doesn't provide a solution. It doesn't provide. So right now, what the typical interpretation of certainly female sex dysphoria is that it is like your wife was told, is that it's a typical experience of butch lesbians. And so, like you said, that's a feeling of, okay, great, I'm not alone, I'm not insane, this is a common experience, but it still doesn't say why it's happening or how to deal with it. And yeah, so if that were true, then at least there is this kind of like social network of support for people going through this. But unfortunately, for a number of people who experience that sex dysphoria, they aren't lesbians. And so that doesn't help them.
Unfortunately, they're not lesbians.
Yeah, they drew the short stick and wound up straight. But
it's actually a good word, right? Because we do think that this would be a very personal and turbulent realization, right? Like, right, what happens for the person who knows they're not a lesbian and they're being told that at least being a lesbian would explain their experience, or the person who feels attraction to women, and so that kind of fits, and then suddenly has this crush on their male friend, right? It's like that's going to upend them all over again, because not only now is the being a lesbian part of their identity, but it's also the reason for their dysphoria. So what the hell does this mean now if I'm not like a gold star exclusive lesbian?
Right. And also understanding that you are a lesbian, that doesn't so even if that is true, that doesn't make you feel suddenly comfortable in your body, in your skin.
Right.
It doesn't reduce the dysphoria. It just gives you a cultural narrative to explain the dysphoria, but it doesn't treat it in any way. It doesn't relieve it. Whereas I think if a person has an understanding of their dysphoria, for what it is, as at least as what we understand it, as this inverted heterosexuality, this need to embody that what you externally find attractive. There are ways that you can kind of incorporate your sexuality into kind of a healthy whole life that doesn't require transition, and it doesn't require you to kind of believe kind of cultural narratives that may not actually be true and don't actually offer any relief from that feeling. So I guess that's not really along the lines of the theme of this episode of why I guess if we were wrong, then the existing narrative would be
enough,
would be useful. It would at least be useful.
Right, which is why I said, right, that is, it does tie into this episode. Don't be so hard on yourself, Aaron, because again, that's actually a main reason of why we would like to be wrong, because then everyone's going to be taken care of. Like we said, there are organizations on our side that have sprung up in the last several years, and more every day, groups of people working towards this vision, right? That most of what we're seeing right now is rapid onset gender dysphoria, and homophobia, basically, right? External and internalized homophobia. So if we're wrong, then these people have lots of good care options to look to once they find it. And if we're right, then they don't.
Yep. And that's the scary part. And why we're having these conversations. Let's see here.
Perhaps now we could go into sort of the flip side of this. So in addressing some of the criticisms against us or against our potential motivated reasoning, I think it's useful to explain why we've analyzed these and why we think it's likely not the case. The first one is, especially sort of like I said, in the case of like, could I be looking to gain more popularity? I was a nobody, just a listener, and now I'm co-hosting a YouTube show with one of the hosts of the Transparency podcast. Well, what Aaron and I are saying is extremely unpopular. It's even more, AGP and AAP is unpopular in the trans community and in the general woke community, and it's potentially even more unpopular in our community, in the gender critical world, in the people who share our goals of eliminating childhood gender interventions and all of that. And so we're not making ourselves any friends having this conversation. Really, for the most part, the only people willing to agree with us or engage us fruitfully are doing so privately in DMs or on anonymous accounts. I can't think of a single person that I've spoken to who agrees with us or thinks we might be onto something who has said so publicly, in my life at least. I'm sure there are some more for you since you've been in the game of this longer, but this is actually not going to make us popular. It's not going to make us popular among our peers. It's also not likely to make us famous or anything like that. I mean, this is a niche subject within a niche subject within a niche subject, right? Most people don't even think about the trans or gender stuff. And then in the people who do, most of them are not even necessarily aware of allogynephilia. And then under that is the people who think that this female analog might actually exist. So this is not exactly our ticket to fame, nor is it our ticket to friendship. So I think that's something to consider about how that might not truly be motivating us, or if it is, we're going to be unsuccessful in that goal.
Yeah. Not only this is such a niche topic, but we are also saying that we believe it explains, again, most butch lesbianism, and I think we think also we'll ultimately get to it, is a lot of even male homosexuality is probably a manifestation of AGP. And these are things that no one, very, very few people want to hear. And fewer people are going to agree with. But yeah, the more we research, the more we hash this out, the more convinced we are that we are correct. And again, we want to be told we're wrong. We want, not just, again, because it would be our lives and relationships would be so much easier if we were wrong, but also we want people to disagree with this, but so far everyone doing so is coming from a place of not understanding metasexuality, and so it's difficult to have that conversation. It's difficult to actually engage and present our hypothesis and present our evidence for it when the people disagreeing with us aren't understanding the foundational hypothesis, which is that this is all rooted in metasexuality.
Yeah, let me pause there just to make something a little more explicit, because I agree. I think even though so much of our focus is how different AAP presents and manifests from AGP, for both of us, a big part in understanding or coming to believe in sort of AAP theory was more deeply understanding AGP and the different presentations of AGP, including the different sexuality presentations, right? Because the stereotype of the AGP is this almost like hyper masculine man who maybe even is a bit of a playboy, like gets married, maybe multiple wives over their life, popping out a bunch of children, and then later in life, coming out as a woman and wanting to live their life that way. It's much less known that from the beginning of the sexology research, the dichotomy was not straight and homosexual, or straight and gay. It was homosexual and non-homosexual. So the bisexuals, the people who were engaging in relationships both romantic and sexual with the same sex, have always been part of this analysis. And so the more that you understand that, the more it starts to become clear that this could obviously be going on for the females. But what you just said is very controversial, that we think this might be going on. This might explain sort of male homosexuality. I want to just state this very clearly. It is controversial, and we're not walking back from it, and we will definitely go into more detail in future episodes, but I want to kind of make our theory or our assertion clear. So when we came into this, we believed that AAP is the ideology, is what causes trans identification, or what causes gender dysphoria, which then causes trans identification among a lot of females. Now, this is not controversial when we look at the males, because it's already relatively widely accepted. For the people who accept AGP as existing, most accept that AGP actually makes up the majority of trans women, of males who decide to transition. So that was sort of the first conclusion we came to, is like AAP is actually motivating, but we think a large portion of females with gender dysphoria, and then from there, the motivation to transition. But what we've also come to believe, and sort of the focus of the navel gaze, is that AAP is not only one cause of gender dysphoria, but that auto-heterosexuality might be one way that homosexuality develops, both in males and females. And so we are saying that explicitly, that, and this is dangerous water and people don't talk about it, but it's a question that people have been asking for a long time. And people are still doing research about this. I saw Blanchard post recently that there are researchers who are trying to recreate some of his studies in like birth order effect and sort of the mother's immune system to see if that tracks now as predicting homosexuality in males. But this is an open question. What causes people to be gay? And we think in some people, what's causing people to be gay is this inverted heterosexual orientation. This sort of thing in their brain that from a pretty young age motivates them not just sexually, but emotionally and in a very confusing way. So yeah, we are saying explicitly that, you know, AAP and AGP doesn't just result in pseudo bisexuality, but rather this can actually manifest as authentic homosexual, exclusive same-sex attraction. Yeah. In males and females. Yeah. I'm more tentative about how many of the males it might explain, but we think it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. And we will. We'll go into more detail in a later episode about, how we kind of have reached that conclusion or that hypothesis. But
it's a hypothesis. Good point. It's really not a conclusion. It's a hypothesis. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is one that we're quite compelled by currently, and we hope others might be as well. And we really, again, as we're saying in this video, and will be a kind of a theme of future ones, is like we want you to tell us why we're wrong about this. And but just caveat of that is, don't tell us we're wrong because we're homophobes or we're bigots or we're hateful or whatever. Tell us, tell us with evidence and objective arguments why we're wrong. Because so far, what we get is we're wrong because it's homophobic to say this, or
we
again,
get thought terminating cliches is the majority of the feedback that we receive. Is either right, this is homophobic, butch lesbians exist, how dare you say this is homophobic, and this is not possible because females don't have paraphilias. Which I don't want to, we'll probably go over this another day, but I also wanted that to be true.
Right.
Because, well, it's just sort of nicer to think about women as sort of like just more pristine, and men are like the dirty dogs who are influencing everyone to be perverted. As a woman, it's like, that's cool to believe, right?
Right.
But also, again, that would falsify our hypothesis if it could be proved that, females don't engage in any of these other paraphilia. So why would we expect them to manifest this paraphilia that is so extreme that it leads people to castration and dangerous surgeries and social upheaval? But what's confusing is the same people who, well, not necessarily the same people, but a lot of people who will say that paraphilias don't exist in females have done research that shows that every sample, every study that has looked into paraphilic behaviors and desires has found somewhere between like 10 and 20%. I think 15% is the sort of mode here across the studies. But at least between 10 and 20% of the sample of people who are endorsing these paraphilic behaviors are females. So we are seeing some women experiencing other types of atypical sexual interests and sexualities. And so that one is starting to feel more and more like a thought terminating cliche. And I just don't even see how it's supported by the evidence. It feels like then it's just a semantic game of like, okay, well, what does paraphilia mean? Because you're saying women don't have this word paraphilias, but you're also saying that a certain number of women endorse all these behaviors over a long period of time. So what do we make of that? Yeah.
And to me, similar to the thought terminating cliche is that over reliance on semantics, and it seems to be doing the exact same thing. It's like, sexual orientation is real, that's a paraphilia, like doing these kind of like over reliance on just these semantics. And I just take issue with that, because I feel like if you're over over focusing on these semantics, you're missing the actual phenomena that we're trying to describe, the actual human experience that we're trying to describe, and I feel like that's so much more important than how we label it. And so it's like, if people want to say, autoandrophilia doesn't exist, that's fine. I can totally accept that. But what then is explaining females who report being aroused by wearing men's clothes, who have to imagine they have a penis in order to maintain arousal, who have to who are just feel alien in their female bodies, like, okay, if autoandrophilia doesn't exist, that's fine. What is the psychological underpinning of these adverse this kind of gender dysphoria that we're describing, and that's what we want to get to the root of. And so people can object to autoheterosexuality, autosexuality, paraphilia, orientation, autoandrophilia, like, object to those words, but we have to be able to discuss the phenomenon that is occurring, that is driving people to gender clinics, that is making people feel so ill at ease in their skin, and seeking transition as the solution. What's important is to be able to talk about that phenomenon and to come up with real palliative solutions to it, rather than arguing about what words to use to describe it.
Totally. And I think, we're almost better off. It's exactly what you said. Like, if we just look at the actual experience, fine, use whatever word you want. Even we don't have to use a word. We can just be descriptive. We can just be qualitative in our assessment of what's going on here. But you almost have to get rid of all of these labels in order to actually see what's going on, right? And I'm going to try to make this point quickly, but in the males, going back a long time, but at least, back to Blanchard's work and sort of naming the typology of the two different paths to male transsexualism. Sexual orientation has come to be shorthand for, like, the easiest way that you can determine what experience of gender dysphoria someone is having, right? And so there's a lot of people who are sort of experts in the field, or just kind of nerds, who all they need to know is this person straight, bisexual, asexual, homosexual? Okay, they're HSTS or they're HEP. Whereas I think that was actually, assuming that we could do the same thing in females is actually one of the major shortcomings, right?
100%.
And it's interesting too, because I feel like some of these researchers, and I can't understate my reverence for these people. Not only do I appreciate their work and think that they were so very correct, I want them to agree with us. Like, I'm seeking their approval in many ways, frankly. And they don't approve, so I'm not getting what I want here. But I
join the club.
Yeah. It's sort of incredible, right? Because they'll say, this is not what's going on because these are the homosexuals, right? So it's a different presentation. So we kind of end it there. If a woman says that she's a lesbian, and she's only been with women, right? If we don't have evidence of her secret bisexual past or something, then yes, she's experiencing dysphoria, then she is HSTS. And this is the first time I'm kind of having this thought, but, like, it's kind of interesting that those researchers believe that, because they also don't believe that female sexuality is fixed in the same way that male sexuality is. And so, they got in a lot of trouble for sort of stating that some trans women or some AGPs lie about their sexual orientation. They said, some of these men claim to be gay, but really they're pseudo-bisexual. Really they're auto-heterosexual. They're allogynephiles. They're attracted to females, but they knew that saying that they were attracted to men is what would get them surgery. Because back then, the HSTS was seen as the true transsexualism, right? And that might be partially because it was sort of the most natural, right? It was the easiest for people's brains to wrap around because they already kind of passed oftentimes before intervention. but also because then it doesn't lead to sort of more social upheaval, right? Then you have these women with men, right? These androphilic males who look like women with men, and so it just helps the cohesion of society. So these researchers understood that there were males lying ostensibly about their sexuality, and yet when a female says that she's a lesbian, like that's just the end of the story. And I'm not saying that a bunch of females were or are lying about being a lesbian. In fact, again, this is the premise of this show here, is that we believe that metasexuality, especially in females, can be so powerful that it does actually progress into sort of true homosexuality, right? Like they're not closing their eyes and looking away to get through the sexual act. They're actually even physically aroused, right, by partners and of the same sex. But yeah, so it's like, why did it just stop there? How can the people who have such a, I would say, proper understanding of female sexuality, at least to know that it's so different from male sexuality, why are they then also saying, but if someone's gay, this, it can't be explained by AAP?
Yeah, they're holding two contradictory, like it requires holding two contradictory ideas that, that female sexuality is fluid and not so hardwired, but that also female gender dysphoria, like that the feeling of being you're supposed to, like, so that experience of homosexuality is so core to your identity that you feel like you're the opposite sex. I mean, how does that coexist with female sexuality is fluid and not hardwired? It's completely contradictory. But if you accept that it's very easy for a female to develop and behave homosexually, yeah. That grammar didn't work, but I think the sentiment did. But for that to develop in females, so for her to understand herself to be a lesbian, but to also feel very ill at ease in her body and believe that she should have a male body, it makes perfect sense that auto-heterosexuality would cause that. That it would, at least to me. If it doesn't make sense to you, listener, please do weigh in the comments. But it just seems, that just seems a much simpler explanation than, again, the two contradictory explanations.
No, totally. And again, it's really simple, and it's not a convoluted mind game. It's literally, I want to be a man with a woman.
Right.
It's not just like,
and being with a woman helps that,
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I obviously I agree. I think that it makes a lot of sense how that could develop early on, especially for females for whom their sexuality is not so fixed. For people with an open mind who don't maybe have some of the bias against AGP and the sort of sexual perversion and the fetishistic nature that our culture kind of our community at least focuses on, this does make a lot of sense. And so this made a ton of sense to my wife, who again is she's neither steeped in the sexology research or in the gender critical community. But it made perfect sense to her that, yeah, her attraction to women is deeply related to how that would relate to her sense of herself, right? Like, she didn't want to be someone's girlfriend. She wanted, without these words, she wanted to be someone's boyfriend. And so being with women, it made a lot of sense to her that developed out of her vision of herself as a man, as a boy. I think if people can, and maybe, this this like brings back the autism thing. It's like, what kind of people are willing to hear this conversation? Because it does sort of feel like certain people are like ready to hear this because they're not emotionally invested at all. Other people I do think could get there, even, neurotypicals, even people who aren't like on the autism spectrum. But it does feel like if you're able to just think this through and maybe depersonalize it, maybe take yourself out of it, it makes sense. And I think too, something that I don't know if we covered last time, but it bears saying, if being with someone of the same sex is what makes you the most comfortable, if that is the most affirming to how you see yourself, and therefore seeing yourself the way you want to enables you to be a doting partner, a sexually engaged partner, to feel really emotionally connected to someone, because it, even if it's partially or because it affirms the way that you see yourself, that's fine. Like I can't see any reason why that's not acceptable. And there's this idea of like, well, that would be wrong. And I think that people kind of do this with the males, right? Well, that's wrong because they're sort of denying their true heterosexuality. The trans women who are with men, they're kind of on this kick to lie, or like they're only feeding that sexual fantasy when they have sex with males, right? But especially for the females, yeah, if being with women just helps you feel much more comfortable with yourself and how you live your life, I can't understand what's wrong with that, especially in like a modern liberal society where we've accepted homosexual pairings. It feels sort of conversion therapy to like insist that, well, no, you would sort of have to be a heterosexual if you go through this, because we know that there are women who choose to be with women for lots of different reasons. This is less acceptable in the lesbians are exclusively same-sex attracted from the moment they come out of the womb crowd, but this is has been readily accepted by the political lesbian crowd for a while, that people can choose to be with women, whether that's for comfort, whether that's for safety, whether that's because they had traumatic experiences with men. If they are, I understand the hesitancy that people have because they think, well, then you must be repressing, right? And repression, we would agree, Aaron and I would agree, is not good for someone's mental health. But I don't know if that's the right way to look at it, especially for the females, especially for females. If we believe that female sexuality is more flexible, is more malleable, then I don't think we have to assume that these women are actually repressing their heterosexuality to pair bond with other women. Was that clear? Did I make my point clear enough?
Yeah, I think so. It was definitely clear to me. And yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think your wife would be a good example of someone like that. And it never, for her, I'm sure it never felt like something that she was kind of, forcing or anything. It was just a natural extension of her male internal identity. And I think that's going to be.
Yeah, well, and she never developed like feelings for men, her attraction from as young as she can remember to males, it's kind of like you've said this, Aaron, was just entirely caught up with the desire to be one. And so seeing a man that she thinks is attractive is simultaneously interpreted as, I want to look like him, like I would want to be him, not in a wear your skin kind of way, right? Which is another reason why this is so unpopular and why we would like to be wrong about it, because people are going to misinterpret it and it's going to sound creepy and all of these things. But yeah, so she never developed adult relationships or even really like adolescent relationships, sexually or otherwise, with males. It always felt more right, more comfortable, and more natural for her to be with women. And that's okay. And I hope that we can get my wife to talk with us one of these days, because maybe especially because she's not in the gender critical world and she doesn't know what all of you people think about AGP. It wasn't threatening to her. It just had so much explanatory value for her experience. And in the way that, like she felt, well, I don't want to speak for her, but I would imagine there was this feeling of feeling caught almost, like, because a lot of these things were things that she had never said out loud. She didn't tell me in the first confession of her gender distress. And she hadn't told anybody else. And so to hear your experience that you've never shared laid out in front of you has got to be a very vulnerable experience, but also just really helpful, relieving in some way, right? Because it finally made more sense than just this is a lesbian thing. Because my wife knows other butch lesbians, and as far as we know, they're not all necessarily going through the same experience, right? Nor did it help explain why they were going through it. And just the last point is, so not only did she not have the stereotypes against AGP working against her understanding here, but perhaps because this conversation happened in the safety of our loving, committed relationship, she was not threatened by the fact that this means that she's some sort of heterosexual, which I think is a huge barrier for a lot of gay identified women in seeing themselves in this experience. But again, once she heard the actual experience of the dysphoria, it just mapped on one-to-one. Like it was like the first time hearing her inner secrets stated out loud. And so, yeah, maybe it is because we're married and she knows that I'm not going anywhere, but she seems to, that it's not that bothersome for her, that part of this is motivated by a desire to look like what you have some attraction to, right? That part of this is motivated by admiration of the male form. And I think, again, one of the sticking points that we've reiterated is like, why would a lesbian want to have a man's body? If a woman is same-sex attracted and she's just only has eyes for lady body parts, right? Why would she want to have a man's body? And so that, yeah, to my wife, was accepting this heterosexual aspect of it wasn't threatening, because it was like, oh yeah, I obviously admire the way men look if I want to literally look like them. And so we are hoping that we can get this message across in a non-threatening, destigmatizing, honest way.
Yeah, because it has the potential to be liberating for the people who experience this. And not liberating in a way like, oh, now I can lie full time about being the opposite sex, but liberating in a way that, like, I understand what's going on for me. I don't have to be ashamed about it. I don't have to, repress it or just latch on to the next, cultural narrative about this. And it could be that you and I here are spinning a new cultural narrative. But yes, please tell us if we are. Like, tell us what we're getting wrong here. Why, because we could certainly be doing that. But yeah, we do not want to be doing that, and so we want to be told if we are. But I think that kind of wraps it up. I think we touched on everything I wanted to touch on. You?
Yeah, there's always more to say, but it will fit better in a later episode. Yeah.
There's many more to follow.
Always.
Yep. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.